Hi, ladies. Welcome back to Ladies Bible Study. July's been a busy month. It has for me anyway. I'm sure it probably has for you if you're busy in your church family. Probably some of you still have yet maybe summer camp or vacation Bible school. All of those things still coming. We do. This week is prep for VBS, and then next week is our vacation Bible school. And then in August, there's still a trip for our young men that are going to football camp in Dwight, Illinois. So July has stacked up to be super, super busy. And I'm not looking forward to the end of summer. I love summer. Um, but sometimes it just does get super busy. And I love spending time with my grandkids. We don't get to do a lot of that during this school year because they're trying to stay on schedule. So lots of time with family over the summer. So I'm thankful, so thankful for that. But we're going to try to get back into the routine of Ladies Bible Study. And today we're on lesson 21, studying about the lady named Ruth, the book of Ruth. And I hope you took time to read the book. It's been a while since I sent the notes out, so I hope you've taken time to read it. It's just 4 chapters, short book, quick read, but a wonderful story. And before you answered any of the questions, I hope you took time to read the book of Ruth. I love the story of Ruth. It truly is one of the most beautiful stories in the Bible, and it unfolds during the latter part of the Judges, and it's really a dark time in the life of the Israelites, days of suffering, and it really was because of their own sin and disobedience. And there was a great famine in the land, and that was God's judgment on them because of their disobedience. And so this famine drove Naomi's family, her and her husband, her sons, into the land of Moab. And Naomi's family was from a place called Bethlehem, Judah, but they went to Moab for sustenance, for food, because they heard that there was food there. And so the Moabites, they were heathen people, and the descendants of they were descendants of the incestuous relationship between Lot and his daughter. And the Israelites, they looked down on the Moabites. They felt like they were an inferior people, so they really didn't have much to do with them. And so in the book of Numbers, God condemns the Moabites for their worship of false gods and then also because of their sexual immorality. He also chastises them for intermarrying with the Moabite women because these Moabite women would influence the Israelite men to worship and do sacrifices to their false gods. And so God condemns that in the book of Numbers. But nevertheless, to Moab they went for help, for food. And we see that so often, even in believers. We go to the world for help first rather than to our Heavenly Father first. And this is what I see happening in the beginning of this story of Ruth. And we know that our Father owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and He even owns the hills. So why do we do that? Why do we go to the world first for help rather than seeking God first? Whenever there's a need or a situation, many times we'll run to our best friend, we'll run to family members, we'll post it on Facebook. All these needs that we have, we're like casting them out for everybody else first before taking them to the Lord first. And so then when we do that, God kind of becomes an afterthought to us. And we have to remember that as wives and moms, that we need to exercise our faith in the one who saved us. And many people struggle with faith in God for the little everyday things. They trust Him for the big things and may have even seen Him do huge things for them in the past. But it's these little everyday things, like our sustenance. We fail to trust Him to meet that need, even though we've seen Him do huge things in the past for us, in providing for us. But a struggle comes along and we quickly forget, that God did this big thing for us in the past before, and He's going to do it again. My husband and his brothers sing a song, No Need to Doubt Him Now, I think is the name of the song. But it's so true. We've seen all these things He's done in the past, and yet we doubt Him. We might not say that we do, but our actions show that we do. And so we need to remember to just trust Him. Can I just encourage you in that, to just trust Him in every little situation that comes, large or small. Just trust Him in it. He'll take care of you. Also remember, you might have little eyes watching you. You might have grown children watching you. Maybe your spouse is watching you for encouragement. Maybe you have grandchildren watching you. People are watching your response to need in your life. So always show them a lady of great faith and trust. And one thing is for sure, when you go to the world for help, it takes a toll on you. It changes you. And so after 10 years of living in a heathen land, we know, if you took time to read this story, we know that Elimelech and both the sons, Mahlon and Chilion, they both died. And that left Naomi and her two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, widowed. They all three were widowed ladies, and they were alone. And so Naomi, she decided to return to Bethlehem, where they were from. She didn't have any relatives left in Moab. There really wasn't a reason for her to stay there. And also she had heard that the famine was over in her land, and that the Lord had visited his people and giving them food. And we see that in chapter 1, verse 6. And so the two daughters-in-law, they decided they're going to go with Naomi. I mean, they were family. They were knit together through the marriages with Naomi's sons. So they're family, probably loved Naomi. And so they decided they were going to go with her. But Orpah, when she counted the cost, what it was going to take to follow Naomi and follow her God and go into Bethlehem, she changed her mind, and she went back. She went back to her gods and to her family, to her homeland, all that kind of thing. But Ruth was quite different. She insisted on staying with Naomi. But as they approached Bethlehem and people saw them coming, they began to ask, "Is that Naomi? Is that Naomi?" To which she responded, "Don't call me that. Call me not Naomi. Call me Mara." She said that the Lord had dealt bitterly with her. And we know that the name Mara means bitter. And so her time in Moab had changed her. And it was showing on her countenance, on her face, so much so that people weren't quite sure that that was really Naomi. That's how much it had changed her. They had to ask, maybe they had to look a little closer. There's something familiar about her. It seems like Naomi, but I'm not sure. Is that Naomi? It had changed her. Not only had grief taken a toll on her, because she was a widow. You know, she had lost her husband. She had lost both of her sons. That's a lot of grief stacked up in their short time that they had been there, 10 years. That's really not that long to lose a husband and two sons. But that was taking a toll on her, and she was living in bitterness of soul. Those were her words describing herself. So living in bitterness changes a person. It does. And I truly believe that living in a heathen land for that long, that also was showing on her. How could it not? She was immersed in it. She lived there in Moab, you know. And thankfully, though, she had had enough of it. And when she heard that things were good in her homeland, she decided to go back home, back to Bethel. So the first question we have here in this lesson is, what did Ruth stand to lose when she joined Naomi? And so there's a good bit of scripture here I'm going to read, so I hope you'll bear with me while I read through it. And we're going to be in Ruth chapter 1, and we're going to start with verse 8. And it says, "And Naomi said unto her two daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. They really loved each other. That would be hard. Verse 10 says, "And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters. Go your way, for I'm too old to have an husband. And if I should say I have hope, if I should have an husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would you tarry for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. And they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. And she said, Behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. And then in chapter 2, verse 11, it says, And Boaz answered and said unto her, It hath fully been showed me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother and the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore. So what did Ruth stand to lose when she joined Naomi? A lot, really, a lot. Um, just think of what it would mean for her to leave her homeland and join Naomi and hers. Think of all the familiar things that she would leave behind. It would mean leaving behind. We don't know a lot about Ruth's life in Moab, but possibly there was a father and mother there. Maybe she had grandparents there. Maybe other siblings, aunts and uncles. The lights or the sights, the sounds, the smells of home. Think of all the things that you miss when you leave home, right? To go to an unfamiliar land and unfamiliar people. She didn't know these people. She would be the outsider coming in. Think of the things that you would miss if you completely uprooted your life to relocate to another country. Would you miss mom's cooking? Even if you're an older person, we always miss mom's cooking, don't we? Moms just have a way of making all of your favorite things. Many of you probably have memories of coming home from school or coming home from college and into the house to a certain smell. I know my husband many times will talk about one of his favorite memories is riding his bike home from school for lunch and walking in the door and smelling French toast, smelling that his mother had made French toast for him for lunch. My girls will talk about coming home from college and walking in the door and smelling chocolate chip cookies baking. So I did that on purpose. I can remember coming home from school, getting off the bus to the smell of chocolate cake because my mother knew I loved her double layer chocolate cake. And so her chocolate cake was always so moist. She made this mayonnaise. It probably sounds really gross if you've never had it, but it was a chocolate mayonnaise cake and it was so moist, so rich, and made from scratch. It was delicious. Homemade chocolate buttercream. That cake was to die for. They just have a way of making our favorite things. She would make that. She'd make this lime cheesecake that I still make to this day because it's so nostalgic, and my kids love it. My grandkids, some of them, not all of them, love it, but my girls do. Chocolate fudge, she would make that. Chicken and dumplings. Her meatloaf was so delicious and so moist. Her potato salad. There's all these things, I start thinking about mom's cooking, and now I'm hungry. My husband has some dental work that needs to be done, so this afternoon I was thinking, what can I make for dinner that won't hurt his mouth, and so I thought, I'm going to do biscuits and gravy and scrambled eggs. He would love that. It's nice and soft. It won't hurt, So that's what's on the menu for tonight. And I make bacon gravy with my biscuits. If you've never made it, you should try it. You might be won over. I've traveled to Ireland and Brazil both, and I can tell you the very first thing I miss when I leave my home country, when I leave home, is my Dunkin' Donuts coffee. And I know it's not the greatest coffee that can be drank. We have some local coffee actually that's better than Dunkin', but I can't get either one of those. And so I say I miss my Dunkin' coffee when I leave the country. But also American food like donuts. You can't get a good donut in Brazil or Ireland. Cheeseburgers. You can't get a good cheeseburger in either one of those countries, And I love cheeseburgers. But there are just things we miss when we leave home. And that's all kind of fleshly, I'm talking about food. Like food is the only thing we miss when we leave home. But family, the smells, the sights, the scenery, it might be different. You might live in the mountains and here you're going to relocate where it's all water, all oceans, or all desert. Maybe the feel of your bed, your pillow. There's so many things that we miss when we leave home. But I'm sure, aren't you, that listening to Naomi talk about her home and her God, that it probably sounded like something out of fairy tale to Ruth. So unfamiliar to what she lived in. She lived in a heathen land. So the things probably that Naomi talked to her about were very curious, very intriguing, just kind of drew her in. And like I said, this is a young lady that grew up in a heathen land with false gods. And just think of the first time that you encountered a Christian home, what your thoughts were about it. I would love to hear if you did not grow up in a Christian home, if the first time that you encountered one, what your thoughts were about it. I would love to hear your experiences there. It probably seemed very curious, very captivating, very fascinating. This is way different than what we do at our house, you know. This was me. I grew up in the home of a drunkard, and I say that because it's the truth, but my father did eventually get saved when I was an older teen, shortly before I got married, actually, and became a wonderful servant of the Lord, Sunday school bus driver, all that kind of thing. But all of my growing up years, I grew up in the home of a drunk. And I loved my dad, don't get me wrong when I say that. But I knew very little of what a Christian home was supposed to be like. I had no idea, you know. And so I remember the first time I encountered a Christian home, I had made a friend in school, something that wasn't easy for me to do because I was so unbelievably shy and backward that I just wouldn't talk to people. But this girl was forward and probably encouraged by her parents, you know, to make friends with kids at school, you know. And so she made a friend of me. They were an ultra conservative family. They were actually Mennonite. The town that I grew up in Indiana, which was northern Indiana, a little town called LaGrange, there was lots of Mennonite and lots of Amish. So it was no great surprise that I would make a friend of one of these girls at school there. And so anyway, she invited me over, and the next morning when we got up for school, because we were getting up to get on the bus to go to school, the mom got up and made a hot breakfast. She gathered the kids around the table and opened up her Bible and read the Bible and had devotions with them. She prayed with all of us. There was lots of hugging and kissing and saying, "I love you." It was so different from anything that I'd ever experienced. And really what it did, it just sparked my interest in this. I like this. I want this. How do you do this? You know, how do I obtain this? It was so different. So it sparked my interest in the things of God at that point, because I really didn't know that much about him. And I started to look more into it, and I eventually met the Tharp family. They came to our town, and my husband's dad came to pastor the church that me and my family had started to attend. And so I'm knocking out a bunch of details there, but that's how that happened. So they came, and I eventually got to see in depth what a Christian home was supposed to be like. And anyway, I can imagine stories from Naomi probably captivated Ruth's thoughts and drew her in. And never underestimate the power of your witness and your testimony. You may be whetting someone's palate for the things of God simply by how you talk about it. If you talk about the things of God or the things of home or your spouse or your kids or your responsibilities, if you talk about all of those things in a negative light, nobody's going to be drawn to that and think, boy, I want that in my life. My life is not like that. They're not going to be drawn in. If you talk about it positively, like it's a good thing and a blessing, that kind of stuff is curious to people. So I also want to put a plug in here for hospitality because you never know what kind of an impact you're going to have on somebody simply by inviting them into your home for dinner. Maybe it's a bus kid, maybe a Sunday school student, or maybe a teen from the youth group, something like that. First of all, sitting at an actual table with actual plates, actual silverware, a glass to drink from, and having actual face-to-face conversation rather than sitting around, you know, like this, you know, eating on a plate on the couch or whatever. That's probably a lot of what they experience, but not the actual sitting at a table with a real meal and people talking to one another and being kind and sharing and being gracious, you know, being helpful. Serving one another. All of that is going to be foreign to them if they have not grown up in a Christian home. And so it might be their first real glimpse into that kind of thing. So don't discount it. You might forget about it down the road, but that will be a memory that will stay with them forever. Case in point, I was probably, I don't know, 10, 11, the first time I went and experienced something like that. So I don't have a whole lot of childhood memories, but I remember that. And so is it any wonder that Ruth didn't want to leave Naomi on her own? She was curious, you know, she loved Naomi. There was something about Naomi that drew her in. And she wanted to stay with her. She didn't want to leave her. She wanted to leave her own home and her own family behind and stay with Naomi. She knew Naomi loved her. Number two, what did she stand to gain? So we talked a little bit about what she stood to lose. What did she stand to gain? And really everything. If you think about it, really she stood to gain everything. A walk with God, learning how to trust God, God's provisions, his blessings, not just physically, but think of all the things that he blessed her with. A mate, her kinsman Boaz, who redeemed her, a lasting family relationship with Naomi, children, and as time went on, grandchildren. She stood to gain a lot. We know that she became an ancestor to the future king of Israel, and ultimately she was placed in the lineage of the Lord Jesus Christ. So many things Ruth gained in her life. And in selecting Ruth, God chose one of the least of these, right? He chose a young lady from Moab, a heathen country, one of the least of these, as the basis for the lineage of, like I said, not just the future king of Israel, but for the Messiah who would save the world. So God's choice to include Ruth in this story of redemption shows that his grace is for all people, and that no person is too insignificant to be used for his glory. And I think of that song, Little Is Much When God Is in It. So nobody is too insignificant for him to use. Don't ever think that about yourself. Number 3 says, describe the main priority in Ruth's life. And that's in Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, and then chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. And those verses say, and Ruth said, and we already read some of these, but bear with me as I reread them as they correspond with different questions. So verse 16 says, and Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest, I will go. Where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. And then in chapter 2, verse 11, and Boaz answered and said unto her, it hath fully been showed me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother in the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore. The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. I love that phrase there, under whose wings thou art come to trust. What a difference for that young lady to go from Moab into this Christian realm, And I believe her main priority, of course, was to provide for Naomi, her mother-in-law, because she loved her. She loved her and cared deeply for her. And Ruth's sacrifice and her hard work to do that sort of thing reflected God's love, because he works hard to woo us, to bring us into his family. Obedience in everyday life, that pleases God, and that should always be our goal, to obey him and to get his smile on our life, to please him. And when we reflect his character through the way we deal with people, the way we interact with people, we bring glory to him when we do that, when we act like a Christian. That's why I always say look for someone to be a blessing to today. And Boaz's loyalty to his kinsman, Naomi's husband, so he was part of Elimelech's family. He was related to him. That reflects God's faithfulness. And then Naomi's plan for Ruth's future, that reflected selfless love, because Naomi could have come back to her country and just said, you know what, I don't have time for you, Ruth. I'm really upset. I'm really in grief. I don't want to have to worry about another person. You just stay there. But she agreed to let Ruth come with her, and she had to exercise a little bit of selfless love there to do that, to let Ruth stay with her. So the book of Ruth showed the Israelites the blessings that obedience could bring. We saw in the beginning what disobedience brought, and that was judgment in the way of a famine. But we can also see what obedience brings, and obedience brings blessing. And it showed them the loving, faithful nature of their God. He's long-suffering, he's merciful, he's gracious. And the book of Ruth demonstrates that God responds to his people's cry. He does. There are times when we get ourselves in a situation because of our disobedience, and we have to suffer the consequences, but he's never far away, and everything that we go through, there's always a purpose for it, and he always has a plan. But he does respond to his people's cry. He practices what he preaches, so to speak. Watching him provide for Naomi and Ruth, two widows, had little prospect Really, really, they had nothing. They had no prospect for a future. They just were intent on sustaining life, basically, is what they were about at that point. But we learn that he cares for the outcasts of society, just like he instructs us to do, right? He cares about people. Number 4 says, explain how Matthew 6:33 is exemplified in the life of Ruth. And we know that verse is, but seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. So when Ruth's husband died, she could have gone her way. She could have. She was grieving as well. She could have gone her way and sought what was best for herself, but she exemplified Matthew 6:33 when she gave it all up to follow Naomi and the God of Naomi. And by doing so, God blessed her with all these things. He did. To start with, her basic daily needs, he met those, didn't he? Her sustenance physically, what she needed, her daily food. And it was more than what she could have ever thought. And if you read through the story, you read the phrase handfuls of purpose, where Boaz instructed the gleaners to drop some on purpose. When you go around the corner there and turn the corner, you just drop a little extra there for Ruth, That's the blessing of the Lord, right? And that reminds me of Ephesians 3:20, which says, now unto him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. So if you keep thinking along the vein of all these things, it's easy to see what was added to her life simply by placing God first. You can see all these things that were added to her life, her daily needs, right? The love of a family, a spouse, children, being placed in the lineage of Christ. All these things were added. Some of them she might not have even thought she wanted or needed, but that goes back to Ephesians 3:20, above and beyond all that we could ever ask or think. That's the way God does things. He always operates in the superlative. I love that about him. So what are some these things that you're desiring in your life? There's got to be things in your life that you want to see happen. There has to be things, and you would have to ask yourself: are you seeking God's things first, or are you seeking these things first? You want to be careful not to get the cart before the horse and do things backwards. If you want God's blessing in your life, you have to do it His way and keep Him first, right? And then you'll get to experience God's blessing in your life. Don't fit God into your schedule, because our schedules are so busy. We don't have time to fit extra things in, do we? Don't do that. Don't try to fit Him into your schedule. You fit yourself into His things, into His timing, His schedule. Fit yourself into His things. Number 5 says, how did Boaz learn about Ruth's character? And we already read some of I'm not going to reread these verses because we've already read them twice. But Ruth 2 verses 11 through 12, he talks about how that it's been rehearsed to him, all that she's done, how that she's taken care of her mother-in-law, etc., etc. And then in chapter 3 verse 11 it says, and now my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest, for all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. That's quite a statement. For all the city of my people doth know. They knew some things about Ruth. That's crazy, isn't it? The whole city. And it's obvious in that phrase, in this verse, that people had been watching with curiosity this Moabitess woman that had traveled in with Naomi. They didn't know who she was, if she was going to take care of her mother-in-law, if she was just a freeloader. They didn't know anything about Ruth. She was a complete stranger there in the land. But in chapter 2, when he tells her to continue to glean in his fields by his maidens, to drink from the water that the men had drawn, other words, she would have had to leave the field to go find water, but he said, no, you stay right here. You stay right by my maidens. You glean where they're at. You drink the water the men have, and I've instructed them not to touch you. So he's got all these things in place for Ruth. There's these blessings, When he told her that all of those things were happening, Ruth said, why have I found grace in thine eyes, and that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing I'm a stranger? What is the reason for that? And Boaz answered and said unto her, those verses, and I'm not going to read them again, that it's been fully showed me all that thou hast done. So people were talking about Ruth. People watch, don't they? People watch our lives. What they saw in Ruth was probably just a breath of fresh air. It was probably very unexpected. She was good, she was moral, she was caring, selfless, she was loving, just a sweet, spirited, kind-hearted lady, you know. She didn't have to go around proclaiming what a good person she was. Look what I did. Look what I'm doing for my mother-in-law. Does everybody see this? This isn't for me. This is for my mother-in-law. Everybody take notice. She wasn't that kind of person. She didn't have to, convince people to look how wonderful she was. She didn't have to do that. She wasn't puffed up with pride concerning her good deeds toward Naomi. I think she just quietly and with a godly, thankful spirit and attitude, she did her work, and she knew, and what she knew was right, and people took notice of it, and they were talking about her. What a sweet lady! Do you see what she's doing for Naomi? She doesn't have to do that. What a wonderful lady! I can imagine what a wonderful testimony she had with the people in the city. And again, people watch our lives and talk about us, don't they? They just do. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, We'd be better off mentally if we just come to grips with that and deal with it, right? But more importantly, the one who really matters that's watching and thinking about us is our Heavenly Father. That's the one we really need to be concerned about. And he keeps good records. Proverbs 20 verse 6 says, most men will proclaim everyone his own goodness. Everybody look at me, see what I'm doing? Did everybody notice this? Right? Most men will proclaim everyone his own goodness, but a faithful man who can find? And Ruth was faithful, right? She was faithful in the things of God. And number 6, and I think we'll stop here. Maybe we'll get through 7. Number 6 says, why is an objective evaluation by others an important element in selecting a mate? And so I love that Ruth obeyed Naomi's instructions concerning Boaz. She could have vaunted herself about this idea of marriage. After all, she'd already been married. She'd already been married to Naomi's son, Mahlon, so marriage, she understood what marriage was about. But we know that Mahlon died in Moab, and so here Ruth is a widow lady, but Ruth had a wonderful, teachable spirit. Even though she was probably a young adult woman herself, she listened to the wisdom of Naomi concerning Boaz. And so sometimes young people, when they get infatuated with the opposite sex, they can't see the forest for the trees. It's just the plain truth. Love is blind, but marriage is an eye-opener. And we say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's actually the truth, And many times young people are so addled by infatuation with this person that they've met that they fail to see red flags. Others can see them, but they cannot. Maybe somebody else can see, oh man, that guy has an anger problem. That's not going to bode well for them in marriage. Or maybe they see, oh, he's got a laziness streak, or maybe she this. So sometimes outsiders can see things that the young people cannot. So always you need to be careful to consult with other people. It's just so important. Your parents, your pastor, and this is a Bible study for ladies, so I would say for you young ladies, talk to that young man's dad, his mom, his pastor, if he has been in bus ministry, talk to his bus pastor. Did I say his youth pastor? Just people that know him, especially if he's from another state or another church and you've not had the opportunity to watch him grow up in the ministry or in the church or something like that. So it's always important to get others' opinions on your intended, right? The pros, cons, all of that, what they know about him, what they see. And so we've had several young couples in our church get married in the last few years, and many of them have done that. They've come, like the young ladies have come to me and said, I'm wanting to court so-and-so. Pastor told me to come and ask you. Well, actually, it was the young man that came to me. The young men that came to me that said, I'm wanting to court so-and-so. Could you tell me some things about them that you might see, So I'm like, wow, that's really a wise way to do things, So always get the opinion of others when you're infatuated with someone. I'm not going to say in love with someone, because that kind of stuff, that comes with time. Real love comes with time, But if they hear a con, like a negative, then it's up to them to discern, is this a deal breaker? This might be a deal breaker. I don't know. Can this kind of behavior, this kind of character trait be changed? That's something they have to get from the Lord and in counsel from their parents and their pastor. So be very careful about that. Let's see here. It really is a wise thing to do when you're choosing a mate, and you might save yourself a lot of heartache down the road. Number 7, and I think we'll quit here. Ruth is the only woman in the Bible actually called virtuous. And we've talked about this before, and the question was to define virtuous. And we knew that virtuous means morally good, acting in conformity to moral law, living your life by a set of high moral standards. That's what a virtuous woman does. This is the set of standards that I live by, and I'm not deviating. I don't care if everybody around me is doing the opposite. This is how I choose to live my life in effort to please the Lord. And it's a life that's free of vice, sinful habits, things like that. So that's a virtuous woman. And a life of vice, like I said, that's habits, sinful habits. So the thing there is, it's never usually just one. Things like that go in pairs. If you have a vice in your life, there's a great chance that there's not just one but two, and maybe 3 and 4, because those kind of things just line up like a train on the track, and one turns into 2, and etc., etc. So this virtuous woman abstains from sinful habits, and like I said, lives her life with a set of high moral standards that she doesn't deviate from. And so this describes the life of Ruth, this Moabite woman. And you're probably familiar with the question, can anything good come out of Nazareth? But we could also ask, can anything good come out of Moab? This is a heathen land. Well, yes. Ruth chapter 4 verse 17 says, and the women, her neighbors, gave it a name, talking about the baby, saying, there is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David, so a future king of Israel. And we know that this is the lineage of Christ. So what a precious, wonderful thing that came out of Moab with a young lady named Ruth, one of the least of these, how God used her. And I think we'll stop there. Let me see how much more is left in the lesson. Maybe I'll do number 8. I'll go ahead and do number 8. Get back up there. Number 8 says, list the character qualities. And I probably could have gone much deeper with this question, but yeah, you'll see why I did what I did. But it says, list the character qualities you see in Ruth. Which do you most admire? Which are evident in your life? Which come hardest for you? So I'm not going to... It's hard to talk about character traits in your own life. This is what I see in my life. I'm super faithful. I'm just like, I can't do that. So that would be a between you and the Lord kind of thing, when you answer that question. And then the which come hardest for you, that's kind of a personal question as well, because we know, without thinking too hard, the things that we struggle with. But without thinking too hard, a few that come to mind when I think of Ruth are faithfulness. She was just faithful as the sun, that Naomi could count on her. She was loyal to Naomi. She would never she would never let anybody talk about her or do anything against Naomi. She was loyal to a fault. She was virtuous. We've already talked about that. She was loving. She had to have had great love for Naomi to turn away from her home country and follow Naomi. She was hardworking. We saw that in the passage about her gleaning in the field, from sunup to sundown without quitting, and she was brave. Took a lot of courage to leave everything familiar and come to a place that was completely unfamiliar. She was compassionate. She was good. She was selfless. She wasn't thinking about her own grief and her own needs. She was thinking about her precious mother-in-law that had grief and had needs. What a woman Ruth was. She was diligent, she was obedient, she was content, right? I love that about her. She was gracious, thankful, she just trusted. So many good character traits. I could probably choose more, but I stopped with those. I'd really love to see what kind of character traits you came up with in thinking about Ruth's life and reading her story. But I suppose of all the ones that I wrote down here, which was what, maybe a dozen or so, her contentment. I always love being around a contented person because they're generally not negative. They're usually pretty positive, pretty even keeled, laid back, they see the bright side of things, a content person does. And I suppose that would be the thing that one of the things I love the most about her is her contentment, but also her compassion and her selfless spirit in taking care of her mother-in-law when she had such deep grief and hurt herself. I really love that about her. I find those the most admirable out of the list. A lot of people can be brave, a lot of people can be strong, hardworking, faithful, all of those general character traits that we try to work hard to have in our life, but it takes a special person to show compassion and put others' needs ahead of your own, especially when you're in the minority in a foreign country. She could have come in and thought, I'm the minority here. You people need to like take care of me and show me around and help me with things, but that wasn't her mindset. She could have thought, I'm the minority, you do for me, but it was completely the opposite with her. She came in knowing she was a foreigner, but she was there to be a help. She chose to make herself fit in, as if to say, it is what it is. This is what it is. There's no changing it. Nothing that I can say about it or think about it is going to change it. It is what it is. And this is where I'm at in my life right now. And I'm going to make the best of it. For the ones that are counting on me, I'm going to make the best of it. I'm not going to cave in and give up and throw in the towel. I'm going to make the best of it for the people that are counting on me and for my own spiritual well-being, right? That was Ruth's mindset. Wish I could have known her, and I look forward to meeting her one day in heaven, but we'll continue on with the second half of this lesson next week, but I'm so glad you joined with me. I know I've been MIA for a few weeks here. Like I said, July. Ooh, I'm almost going to be glad to see it gone. But I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful rest of your week. Look for someone to be a blessing to today and look for someone to give the gospel to. I love you all, and I'll see you next time.